Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me in the Critical Thinking Classroom. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and I am the teacher. We're in the classroom. This classroom, looking at my hair, I still have not improved my hair since this morning. I thought I just did, but apparently not. Makeup, hair. Okay, so I am here. I don't need to be right back. I'm here, and we are talking about the problem with self-esteem. I wanted to get a few notes here because I wanted to make sure that I covered this really thoroughly with you. It is a concept. This, if you remember, the critical classroom is a classroom for, that's really, I generally make it broad. I think we have very, adult thinkers at very young ages, right? And then I also think that we have, adults who think like kids sometimes. Who even knows? So I wanted to get my notes on this. So that I covered the material. I think that this is an adult topic. Probably more adult, slightly more adult. Well, more adult than middle school, but certainly a middle school student could sit here and fully understand. And that's the thing about this topic, is that you can understand it for all kinds of ages. That's the thing about this. So we're talking about self-esteem, right? And for our younger people, self-esteem really is your feelings of self-worth. How worthy do you feel? Right? How deserving do you feel? Do you feel that you deserve good things in life? And in fact, I will show you as we go through this a little bit more about, which I don't have pulled out. Right now I wanted to get the basics. That's all we're going to talk about today, are the basics of this theory. All right. So the theory, again, is a theory from Martin Seligman. And I would pull up his picture, but I'm not, I really did have a lot to do and then this week, as you know, as I've said. And then I was tired, and then it wipes you out. And if your body's telling you to sleep, you really should sleep. Now, you have to be careful if your body's telling you to sleep too much. You have to note that, because that might be depression setting in. And we really don't want to sleep too much when we're depressed, right? What we want to probably do, the very first thing you want to do is you want to get some vitamin D. Very first thing you want to do if you're depressed, very first thing to do is shoot up your vitamin D levels, which I have not been doing, but I've been feeling pretty good, despite the demons that are around me, right? Okay. All right. So we are talking about the problems with self-esteem. And so I started with the idea that, what is self-esteem really? Well, because some people, you get the gist of it, right? You kind of get the gist of it, but you don't exactly know what we're talking about. Maybe like you can't put it into words, right? And there are a lot of different ways that we can help put these things into words for us. One of them is by looking at the surveys that measure self-esteem. And then we can see, oh, self-esteem is this, but not that, right? Here's something that you might want to think about trying. And that is an exercise in, if you were to develop a self-esteem scale, a survey, we use fancy words sometimes. Sometimes I talk purdy too. If you were to develop a self-esteem scale, what would that self-esteem scale look like? So what I mean is, and I'll even give you a little hint. I'll give you a few hints on this, okay? So self-esteem scale. So come back on Tuesday when we get back here in the classroom and develop what you think is a measure. If you wanted to measure the level of someone's self-esteem, how would you do that? And I want to give you the free rein. So how would you do that? You are being tasked with, or you are being, whatever the right word is there, commissioned, whatever, this task of writing a survey that you think would measure anyone. So you can start with yours. What could you develop a survey? I'm looking at this over here. Yikes. Develop a survey that measures self-esteem. I want you to think about it any way that you want to. All right, any way that you want to. You have got person A. Let's call her. I'm gonna use that word. I don't want to use that name. Somebody was like, "You used my name in class." I don't even know who you are. Okay, let's say that we have Terry. So we're measuring Terry's self-esteem. Okay, and then we are measuring Bobby's self-esteem. Okay, Terry and Bobby. All right, so and there's a reason, because I'm a psychologist, why I just gave you those names and why I gave you two names, right? So you are measuring Terry and Bobby's self-esteem. Two people, two different people, all right? You can give them, in your mind, you can kind of think of them as A and B, or Terry and Bobby, or whatever you want to do, all right? But you are tasked with measuring their self-esteem accurately. How would you do that, all right? And so that's what we had to do, right? And so the scale that we have now, that we use, we've had since 1965. You can look it up, but I would, if I were you, I would figure out your own self-esteem measure first, then look up the self-esteem scale by Rosenberg, 1965. Rosenberg self-esteem scale, 1965. So this is an interesting way that you could, use the internet or your own interest to find something out more that's, valuable and beneficial to you. Okay, so that's a scale we've been using since 1965 to measure self-esteem. When we use the same scale over and over and over and over and over and over and over again for all of those, decades that we've used it, what that does is it helps establish how good a measure is. We could see if it's a good measure. Constantly checking, does it match your real level of self-esteem? Now, when I was here yesterday, I also talked about narcissism, right? Which is different. And there is a narcissism scale that is out there. I'm going to get to some of the data after we lay the groundwork for this self-esteem. So on Tuesday, I want to get to some of the data that has to do with high and low self-esteem and what are the outcomes of what we're saying. All right. Because what we're talking about here is the problem with self-esteem. That's what we're trying to think about. And remember, we try and think about these things in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, right? Do we have an understanding of what self-esteem is? Do we have ideas from memory of times where we thought this person exhibited low self-esteem, this person exhibited high self-esteem? So we kind of have examples in our memory. And then if we were to apply those examples to writing up a measure for self-esteem, if we were to apply those, you can see how we would really be learning a lot in depth, have a deep dive into what self-esteem really is. And what I am playing on right now is what I know to be many people's intuitive belief that self-esteem may not serve us well, right? Our ideas of self-esteem that we have established, because we have people who are out of control, right? That think so highly of themselves. They are narcissistic, and we are not seeing the same outcomes that we used to predict in the 1980s. Regarding self-esteem, right? Now go back to yesterday's class where I talk about some of those associations that we found in the data with self-esteem, right? So it's associated with grades, it's associated with teen pregnancy, it is associated with drug use, it's associated with sociability, right? How well you socialize. That is what that word is, right? Not being a sociopath. Sociability, that's an ability, not a a pathology, right? A disease, not a disease. A pathology is a disease. That's what we mean by pathology. Okay, all right. So a task for you would be to develop a measure for Terry and Bobby of self-esteem. And you could have pictures in your head. You could give them different names. I just gave them names because that's what I wanted to do for you. All right. Now, what I would like to say is that one way that we usually do this is Now, maybe you already, hopefully you have your own idea about how you're going to do this. And I don't want to, never mind. I don't want to mess up your ideas, then I'm not going to. Okay, so develop that, right? And then, like I said, there's also a Rosenberg self-esteem scale that I'll get for you in a picture of Martin Seligman, so that you know who we're talking about, who is the father of positive psychology. So I talked about that on Wednesday. Okay, so if we can see here that we may be able to get self-esteem. I want to draw the association because this was so important for an actual application and also a really good explanation of when you would have higher self-esteem and why, and when you wouldn't, right? The most self-esteem that we would have, the highest level of self-esteem would be if we looked at, or our view of intelligence, or view of life basically was an incremental view. So the bottom set of bars there, right? Or boxes, whatever, bottom set, right? Okay, so that would give us the highest level of self-esteem, but the most would be built on a solid foundation of something that I really know and have learned over time and mastered. That would give me the highest self-esteem. I would still have a great level of self-esteem as I was learning to master, right? But by the time I mastered something, hopefully I have refined all of those nice variables, nice elements of my self-esteem that now I have this great foundation of self-esteem, right? Not to the point of narcissism, but this really strong foundation, a reason for believing in ourselves, right? That's really what the problem right there in a nutshell with self-esteem is that we wanted our children to believe in themselves without actually making them believe in themselves. That's what it amounted to. We wanted our children to believe in themselves, and yet we did not give them a reason to believe or teach them to actually really believe in themselves. So I always say what we tried to do, or what we did, was we injected them, right? Like a vaccine, we injected them with self-esteem instead of allowing their natural immunity, which makes the most sense, to build up as the individual needs the resistance. That's the difference as well, right? I don't need to have all of my immune cells on high alert all the time. My body should know when my immune system needs to be on high alert and when it doesn't, right? We are talking about regulation in our spiritual classroom. That is, using a term that's a little bit more adult, that is effective regulation. That is, when do we, even when you're talking about, politically, they are regulating things. That means they're making laws here, but not here, in order to control the flow of In our case, it would be the economy, right? The flow of money is what they're trying to do. That's what regulation does. It's the same thing our body does, but it's not trying to control money. It's trying to control well-being. Our bodies and our minds and our spirits are all trying to control our ability to be healthy with these outside demons who are making us so unhealthy. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you, you demons, making us so unhealthy? Don't you even know that all that you're doing is diseasing your own body? You pathology, you. Don't you even know that? I mean, and that is the truth. That's the truth. When there are outside forces, this is why something internal like self-esteem is so important. So that when we are confronted with demons from the outside, and I mean that literally, and I mean that figuratively as well, right? Because these forces feel like they're evil to us because they make us drown. Because they're drowning us, right? They really literally are. They're drowning us of spirit. They're drowning us of our own independent thought. They're drowning us of our positive emotions so that we are always alert and on edge and prepared to be negative. That's what they're looking for. They're all sitting back here with their cartoon evil characters hats on and sitting over here. What do you call this? Wringing their hands, but not in that nervous way, in that evil way. That's, what do you call that? Somebody type it down below as you keep typing your comments. Okay. So this chart is important to me because even in this chart, it is demonstrating how we can develop levels of self-esteem. The top set of bars underneath entity, right, an entity perspective that I either have the skill or I don't, would give us far less self-esteem than the incremental perspective. So we're seeing actually different gray areas on how we might have some self-esteem in some areas, right, but not high self-esteem in general, that's stable across all situations. That's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for stable emotions, stable self-esteem to regulate in a way that I feel comfortable, and when I have to give it a little bit of, punch, I've got it when it's necessary, the resources when they're necessary. All right? That's what sugar is like, how sugar is harming us. Is because it's giving us this anxiety, this excess resource that we're not using, right? And we have to use it because we don't store it. So we store it as eventually it becomes fat. It's got to become fat. Any energy that doesn't get stored or doesn't get used, right, is stored as fat. Because carbs. We get carbohydrates, but carbohydrates, they're either burned or they're stored. So we do store carbohydrates, carbs and fats, right? We don't store sugar. We store carbs and fats. That's what we do. We get addicted to sugar because we can't store it, likely. Likely, we get addicted to sugar because we can't store it. So our resources are carbs and fats. There we go. Ta-da! Okay. What does that have to do with self-esteem? Utilizing all of these resources up, depleting the resources that we have in our minds, in our bodies, in our spirits, right? And think about this. Think about the energy that you get when you have high self-esteem. We're going to talk on Tuesday about some of the research in this area. But do you know that literally self-esteem is literally a resource? And by that, I mean it can then therefore be depleted. So we could literally see if I put stress on you, it depletes self-esteem. But who for? Who do you suppose for? Me? Likely not. You know why? I'm not being arrogant. It's because I have stable self-esteem. because there can be situations that come and go, but my self-esteem is stable. That's the reason why. All right, so the same thing that you are looking for. You are looking for stable self-esteem so that the events don't knock you out, right? And when the events don't knock your mind out, your spirit out, then you stay healthy in your body, all right? And it's just common sense. It's just common sense. It doesn't have to be voodoo. It doesn't have to be magic. There is a mechanism by which our good health occurs, and bad health, of course. Okay, moving on. Here's a picture of Martin Seligman, but not. There's a picture of Martin Seligman, but not a very good picture. Okay, all right. So I wanted to keep for clarity about how to get where we need to go, right? That is a great chart to understand. So you can look up different, you can, go do some investigation, and the investigation that you would really do would be on mastering things, okay? So, and if you wanted to put incremental, right? If you put those two terms in, that would lead you to data in this area, all right? Or research in that area. And if information were all free, like it should be, like knowledge should be free, then you would be able to look up the scientific reports as well. Okay? All right. Health, we've already talked about health. I'm going to read this one more time because I want it to resonate with us. I want the waves to continue to flow over us, these words to continue to flow over us. The more self-absorbed we are, the less there is to find absorbing. To have no real involvement in others, no identification with them, no interest. In other words, to lack compassion, or the other word that we have used a lot is empathy as well, because the research, most of the research is in empathy, or especially older research. Newer research that we've done in psychology is in compassion, is to shrink one's world down to the cramped precincts within one's own skull. And there is not enough there for one long solo trip in a car, let alone for a lifetime. And you know who is spending a lifetime in their own mind? Besides gamers, it just absolutely is, because that is absolutely no interest, no involvement, no engagement in other people, right? And what's the other one? Involvement. Identification, and no identification. Who are you identifying with? You're right. In that gaming world, you're identifying with false people, right? But who else has long trips in their own car or in their own mind? Narcissists. And I'm gonna say, look at this is part of the problem, right? Look at Hollywood. Full of narcissists. We all know that they are narcissistic. There are some of them that are that involve themselves in things that are social justice, related to social justice, but not very many of them, right? Not very many of them. And in my, little spiritual speech that I usually give, and especially in my mysteries that I have, if you don't know, eyes that don't see, ears that don't hear, because if you had eyes that could see and ears that could hear, you would repent. This has to do with, I also talk about the names and the importance of names and naming things as well. And if somebody, and we've got Hollywood filled with people that we don't know their names, right? That live a life that is self-absorbed and fake, right? I don't even know your real name. And I've explained the dangers in not knowing your real name. In my mysteries, I explain the danger in not knowing who you are. And it appears to me that, and so all I was going to say is, and so I picked on Hollywood for a moment, but I'm also going to pick on the news media as well, because these news medias are hoes with a great big giant WH, right? With a great big giant WH, not even in the nice, funny way that we want to say it, right? Not even in that cute way. They are with a WH is what they are. And we found them now here in Michigan as well, because a few years back, we had an industry. We started developing an industry over, I think, or under Grant Holmes' authority. And then Rick Snyder came in and demolished it. And what that industry did is it developed a bunch of actors and hired a bunch of actors for what is going on right now in the mysteries, right? And my guess is that they're all thinking that they're going to be in the next Netflix series on trying to solve these murders that took place over 20 years ago that seem to have something to do with sex trafficking. And I feel like I need to say that because these are young girls who are of this age group that they are abusing and looking for. And this all has to do with this self-absorption and desire to have our 15 minutes of fame without ever working for it, without ever building a level of mastery, without ever building a foundation for real self-esteem. So that's why I wanted to come back to this again. And all of that has to do with feeding the self, feeding the self, feeding the self, feeding the self. That's what that has to do with, right? So the sergeants who make sure that I know their name, and that prosecutor, that is going to look awesome on Netflix, isn't it, prosecutor? Isn't that going to look awesome on Netflix when Annette made you so nervous that you that underneath your mask, your glasses got all steamed up, and you're just a meek little Christian, right? So who would even guess that your glasses would get all steamed up when little old Annette over there is sitting across from you? Were you the same guy who was over here? Were you the same guy who was over here? We'll talk about it later in my mysteries. Just letting you know. On my road, Matt. Okay. All right. So that is the bottom line. This self-absorption where we would rather have one long lifetime of a solo trip in our car, no matter in our minds, right? No matter whether we had enough to enjoy it or not. It doesn't even matter. We don't even have to enjoy it. Right? As long as I am absorbed enough with myself that I can take my journey, even if it's the most boring journey on the planet, right? Just let me take my journey. I bet you know how to spice that journey up, don't you? I bet you know how to spice that journey up, don't you, Sergeant Case? Okay, so this is where we left off with depression and violence as being the two epidemics here in the United States. And again, where did we get the idea of these epidemics? This is a theory. So here, right here, is the full text of Seligman's speech to the APA Association. So National Press Club, Morning Newsmaker, and September 3rd, 1998 is when this is from. So, here we go. Martin E.P. Seligman speaks at the National Press Club on two main epidemics afflicting American youth, and they are depression and violence. Okay? So, he gives some stats here. The very first thing that he does is he gives some stats. And these, and so the stats are that, first of all, these two epidemics have come about over, and now we've got the last 60 years. Over the last 60 years. He was writing this 20 years ago, right? Over 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So it came about over the last 60 years that it is 10 to 20 times depression is 10 to 20 times higher than what it was 50 years ago. That the average onset, the age for the average onset of depression used to be 30 years ago, 40 years ago, now 30 years of age. So what does that mean? What does that mean? The average age for the onset of depression. If somebody was going to be depressed, the average age for people who were getting depressed was 30 years of age. Today, it is 14, about 14. Okay? And maybe even less now. And maybe even less. This was written in, this is research that he talked about in 1998. So that, and laid the foundation for this epidemic of depression that we have, right? And appropriately labels this as an epidemic, right? Appropriately labels this as an epidemic. And what I mean by that is I talk about what an epidemic means exactly by definition in yesterday's class, in Wednesday's class, in day 11, all right? Day 11. Okay, all right, so we've got these new facts. Let me see if there's anything else. 10 to 20 times as much as it was. Oh, those were the two things. The two astonishing things is what he says. Okay. He says here, I'm sorry, sometimes I do that, right? Sometimes I get caught up. Every statistic we have on the quote, objective, unquote. Oh, he's doing quote, unquote, right? Every statistic we have on the quote, objective, unquote, well-being of young Americans is going north. And every statistic we have on their demoralization on depression is going in the other direction. So this isn't just an epidemic of depression. It is demoralizing is the word. It's demoralizing our young people. What does that mean? What does that mean to be demoralizing? Well, what that means is I feel morally bad about myself. That's where depression comes from. I feel morally bad about myself. I feel guilty and I feel ashamed. But here's the thing about this that I know as a psychologist, but also that I know as a Christian, and that I know as a woman, and that I know as a teacher, and that I know as a psychologist, and I know about, because what I know is that the root of this demoralization, the root of the guilt and shame that makes us feel demoralized, what I know as an expert, as almost the expert in this area, is it's a lie. It's a lie. It's a lie. That's what I know. That's what I know. And what I know as all of those things, as a teacher, as a woman, as a Christian, as a psychologist, as a mother, what I know is that you can have a list of sins as long as, your arm. You could have a list of sins, and it could be in really fine, 7-point print even, and, put in 3 columns even. The list of sins that are that long, that would fill a page in 7-point font, right? You could have that. So you have reasons for your guilt and shame, right? And if you can believe it, it's still a lie. I know. How can that be? Because your true desire is to not have that guilt and shame. Just like that Caitlin Smith song, that's I Can't Change, right? And I've heard people say, why can't I just act good? Why can't I just be good? Why can't I just make the right decision? Why can't I just give up my addiction? Right? So I've heard people say these words. Why can't I do that? And it is the guilt and shame that keeps us from that ability, is what it is. So it's that feeling that you can't overcome. And that's the lie. That's the lie. That's I guess that's the best way I can explain how I know it is a lie. That's the lie right there. That's where the lie lays. I think that's proper grammar. Okay, all right. So what we have here then are, I didn't put that last problem up there. There actually are 3 reasons for the epidemic of depression. So let me list the 3 reasons. The 3 reasons are the I-we balance, or what we can call an I-we imbalance, actually. So that's reason number 1. Reason number 2, that we have this epidemic of depression. So we're going to cover that first, and then we're going to go into violence. Once we lay the foundation for the epidemic of depression, it's going to make sense of the epidemic of violence then. So the second reason we have this epidemic of depression is because of the self-esteem movement itself, that we have a wrong conception of what self-esteem is, and what we have been doing in the process is we've been basically mismanaging or misregulating or misrepresenting what self-esteem really is and what it should be and how we get it. And if I were to ask you how we get higher self-esteem, I would expect that you can answer that question by saying what? How do we improve our self-esteem? I would expect that you know the answer to that right now. How do we improve our self-esteem? By mastering. We improve our self-esteem through mastering, right? Now I expect that you know that by now. Okay, so we've got the the cure there. So self-esteem needs to be about mastering, and it has not been about mastering. It has simply been about injecting our children with it, whether they earned it or not. We give it to them, right? Whether or not their immunity can take the punches. And that is the truth. Our bodies replicate what our minds and our spirits need. Our bodies replicate. So, can our bodies take the punches and still be healthy? Can your self-esteem take the punches that it's gonna take? Can your self-esteem take the punches that it's gonna take and still be okay? And let's just boil this down to like some of the real issues that we have right now. You can't be called a her if you look like a her, but you're a him. You can't make that mistake because what? Because your self-esteem is so fragile that somebody can't make that mistake with you? Somebody can't read you a Dr. Seuss book and you get the idea of Dr. Seuss without being offended by it? You know what that says? You have fragile self-esteem. That's what that says, right? If a woman can't call you out on your misbehavior and you without you being enraged by that, you have fragile self-esteem. You're fragile. No doubt about it. If you live your life on Facebook or on your social media ranting and raving and complaining, even if what you're doing is ranting and raving and complaining about what you think are good things, kind of like I am right now. What? A little introspection. I don't even know what your name is, officer. I still don't know your name. I'd worry about that. Okay. The third reason for the epidemic of depression. So number 1, the I-we imbalance. Number 2, the emphasis on self-esteem, the improper self-esteem movement, the failure of the self-esteem movement. reason number 2, and reason number 3 is victimology. And what I have there are the benefits and the costs of victimology. We would not become victims if there wasn't a benefit to it. All right. So the third reason why we have this epidemic of depression is because we have an epidemic of victimology, this idea of victimology. Why do we have this epidemic of victimology? Because there are benefits to it. So let's take a look at each one of those categories, shall we? So the I-we, and I should call it the I-we imbalance. And what this is as you can see I have up there, it's a big I and a small we. So for many of you younger people, Gen Z people, you likely don't remember a time where we had a big we. But there was a time where we emphasized our community and our neighborhood. We didn't have, of course we didn't have the social media. We didn't have the internet. So when, for example, and I tell this to my students and I get, although it's such a part of my reality, it seems like it's nothing. I realize the more and more I have to explain the details of this so you understand that it is really something that we used to have to do. So the story in our day is, our parents used to have to walk to school uphill both ways, right? Ha ha, hee hee. Yeah, you struggle. Forget about your struggle. What about my struggle, right? But let me tell you about a different age of information, right? And so that you can see how we have lost this big we and it's become a big I and now a small we. And so many of the examples that you can ask your parents or your grandparents about the day where we didn't have all this information at our fingertips, right? So when I used to have to look something up, right? So you come to your computer and you look it up and you assume that the information that you look up in the magical mystery cloud out there, Google, whatever it is that you use, is giving you the right information. Why would it be giving you the wrong information? Well, the answer to that is to make money, right? So there's a big reason, and the reason, and it's our whole capitalistic system is based on that reason. So why would they give you misinformation at all? They would give you misinformation because they want to make money, right? So how did I have to get information? Because I got my PhD. So I went all the way through college. I got my PhD in psychology. So all that while I had to write a master's thesis, right? And then I also had to write a dissertation to get write my master's thesis, and which was a scientific paper that I had to write to get my master's, and then I had to write another scientific paper in order to get my dissertation, or for my dissertation in order to get my PhD, in order to become a doctor in psychology. I had to do that. So if I couldn't look it up online, then where did I get the information? How did I get the information? Well, on the third and fourth floor of Wayne State University, where I went to college and got my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD at Wayne State. On the third and fourth floor of the library, they were filled with journals. So the whole third floor and the whole fourth floor, maybe more, those were the ones I went to consistently, were filled with books, which were bound books of basically magazines is what they were. All right, so what does that mean? It really means that I'm looking for one of my magazines over here, and I don't have them. But basically, it's a big fat book of every article in a journal. But these journals, we call them journals as opposed to magazines, right? But they're the same thing. They really are a magazine filled with articles, but they're filled with scientific articles. So that's the difference. They're written by scientists. They're magazines. They're filled with articles, but they're scientific articles written by scientists on their experiments or work that they've done. They also write on their theories that they have, right? And there's a scientific way that they present their theories. There's a scientific way that they present their experiments. There's a scientific way that they present their studies or their cases or whatever. There's a scientific way that they present it, and then the publisher of these journals, like the American Psychological Association, for example, they publish them in a magazine that comes out usually on a monthly basis, just like Time magazine, or just like, Parents or whatever magazine that you read, right? Comes out on a monthly basis. But then, because they're scientific articles that I need as a scientist, what they do is they take that for the month or for the year, and at the end of the year, they bind all the magazines into a leather-bound book, is basically what it amounts to, all right? They used to actually have the actual magazines that were bound in a leather-bound book, and then what they started doing is just the copies of them, right? All leather-bound for these articles that were published for the year in that journal. All on the 3rd and 4th floor of Wayne State University, where I used to go, right, in their library. And so remember, on a university campus, if you recall being on a university campus, everything is in the middle, so you have to park way on the outside, right? And then you have to walk, and usually the library is in the center of the campus, so you always had to walk it wasn't on the edge of the campus. You always had to walk into the center of the campus for the library. That's the same way I feel at Oakland University. It's the same thing, basically in the center of the campus, or somewhat. Okay, so you had to park, you had to pay, you had to walk into that, you had to go to the 3rd, 4th floor. And then what you had to do is, prior to that, you had to know what you were looking for. So you had to, now we did have computers to look things up, right? To look that up, to see, we had computers to look up what was in the library. So we could look up the topics of these journals. And so we would write down the journals that we needed to read that were part of our topic, right? And then we would go to the library and we would look at them, and we would have to read part of the article to decide, enough of the article to decide, do we make a copy of it? Because that was the only way that I could take it home, was to make a copy. So then we had to pay for all the copies. And of course, if I had to pay, and these journal articles, some of them were 40 pages long, if I had to pay to make a copy of a 40-page one article, it better be a good article. And I better read it too, because I paid for that article, to basically read that article. And I went through a lot of trouble to get the articles that have to do with that, right? And so what we are doing is we are creating a big we. I have to interact with the librarian. I had to find all that information out. I had to learn how to get that information by taking classes. That was the only way I could even learn where the information was, even to begin with, right? So I had to sign up for classes. I had to go to Wayne State, because you can't get that information. You can only get still that information primarily at the university. And that's it, right? So all of that work meant that I had to interact with a lot of people, and likely had to talk with people in order to learn it. All of those things created a bigger we. So that's one example of how in my academic career, I had a much bigger we. Now for your academic career, what do? The easiest thing for you to do is go to your computer, wherever it is, and get all the information there and print it out. Do you see how my experience of college research was a big we, while your experience of college is likely a very small we, a very big I, all focused on what you have to do to get the job done. Now, I've talked before about cultures, and this is an example of Western culture, is what it is. It is part of the Western system, to say, I can do it by myself, and when I do it by myself, I get all of the rewards as well. All right, that's a Western kind of perspective. People like me who work in an Eastern sort of perspective, where I am interacting, because I'm a social psychologist, right? I'm a social I'm very much hypersocial. So what happens in this kind of atmosphere then when you've got people who are hypersocial, right? And then can't be social. All right. But anyway, I tend to be more Eastern in being hypersocial. I tend to be more Eastern in my thinking, right? And even in my openness to religious beliefs and things like that, or spirituality, right? Even my openness to that, that seems to be more of an Eastern kind of perspective. So you can see that I buck this system a lot that has to do with being so big I, right? I really talk a lot about the disadvantages of this big I and small we, which is really that language, big I, small we, is completely from Martin Seligman, right? The concepts I developed, I do have some of my own ideas, but the concepts there really were on the big I, small we are really Martin Seligman's. Okay, and so now this next note, I want to take a look at my notes. So what this big we used to do for us is it would help us, and this actually is part of the Eastern culture, is that the big we buffers our self-esteem. It's a buffer against depression. Why? Because we have a group there to help us, right? We've got the group there to support us, to say it wasn't just your failure. We failed you as well as your peers, as your work companions, as your spouse, as your family, as your extended family. The weight of a failure in a big I world is all on me. The weight of a failure in a big we, it gets dispersed, right? That weight gets dispersed among all individuals. And this is interesting when you think about also group think and group dynamics, about how people are feel less responsible in a group to help. Why? Because that responsibility is dispersed. It's the same concept. Sometimes it works in our favor and helps boost our true self. Sometimes it can work against us, right? In that it diffuses, we have an expression in psychology, diffusion of responsibility, right? Why don't the people help when there's a large group? We called it diffusion of responsibility. We talk about that actually in our philosophical classroom, and we've been talking about it on and off, but a few episodes ago, like episode 7 or something like that, we really honed in on day seven, we really, of the philosophical classroom, we really honed in on that concept there of helping and diffusion of responsibility. Okay, all right. That's it for that. So we got through the big I, small we. And you know what? That's what I'm going to do for today. I could go on a little bit, but the self-esteem, I don't want to cramp anything into that self-esteem, because that really is the dominant one. The big I, small we affected our self-esteem, and the victimology is an outcome of the effects of our self-esteem. So that's the big one there. That's the big one right there. The I, we is a predecessor to our self-esteem, and the victimology is a consequence to our self-esteem. So we will come back on Tuesday and hit that self-esteem movement really hard to see what the downfall is, and then the upturn in depression and violence. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. I am the teacher, and this is the classroom. You can also check me out on my website. I actually do have, oh gosh, I'm going to have to do that on a daily basis. Put up the latest videos for you. But you can hit that. At least now you've got a source to go to the videos. I will be putting up the worksheets and things like that. So I'm working on the website, www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. Thanks for joining me.